Okay, hello everyone, and let's get started. Adolescent Psychology 261. And so the course is going to move pretty quickly, and obviously with an online class, a lot of the work is going to be for you to kind of follow the PowerPoint that I've provided for you. If you haven't done that already, you should look it up. It's on Moodle. And so what I wanted to do today is help you get started. And so if you're looking at your PowerPoint, you're going to see sections and the chapters laid out, and generally the PowerPoints follow the sections. And the first section is called the historical perspective. And so you're going to, in this section, what I would expect, I will select somewhere between 4 and 5 questions on the test. I'll try to have the test follow the order of the book, so that should help. But under the historical perspective, what I would do is pay attention to the person's name or the time frame, and then there's usually a key element somewhere in there. So an example would be, if you're looking at your PowerPoint, you see Plato, and then you see reasoning. And so that's the key thing in that one. With Aristotle, you're going to see decision making or self-determination. And so as you go through that section, just look, Middle Ages, you're going to see miniature adults. The 50s, you're going to see silent generation. So there's going to be a key term in there that should help you identify or define the period in history that the author is talking about. So again, that's section 1, and the historical perspective. Section 2. In section 2, there's some terminology there that gets into, and sometimes test questions will simply be definitions, but I would expect looks like about 4 questions from section 2, but a lot of the questions are in a scenario form, example of stereotyping. It won't just be the definition, but it would be some scenario about someone stereotyping, and you would say that he is stereotyping an adolescent. So for instance, the adolescent generalization gap is some terminology that stereotypes adolescents in particular based on a very limited amount of information, and usually just focuses on those high-risk kids that get our attention. And so look at that section. As you continue through section 2, you're going to see some discussion on social context. I would pay attention to the definition of context, which is simply stated the setting in which development occurs. So they're talking about what is the environment in which the kid is growing up, and how does that impact his behavior and his thinking. So that's a social context. So a kid growing up in an inner city would have a different view of the world, a different set of values than maybe a kid from a rural community, and so on. So there's going to be another section pay particular attention to called the global perspective. And in the global perspective, there's going to be various paragraphs, but if you look under the paragraph on family in particular, you're going to see secular trends. Secular trends are patterns of change over time. And so it's pointing out how have families changed over time globally. Like, if the divorce rate in America began to increase in the 60s, was there a trend globally that followed that same pattern? So look at that section, especially the paragraph on family. And then I'm going to point you to section 3, the nature of development. Again, we're talking about adolescent development, a very specific time in these kids' lives where they're not children, but they're not yet adults. And so there's a lot of discussion about all the different stages of development that people go through. Well, the early stages of childhood certainly help us to understand as the kids arrive into adolescence, but pay particular attention in this section to the section on early adolescence, which is going to be primarily biological, puberty, growth, growth spurts, sexual maturation, things like that. They're going to talk about cognitive development in that section where they're thinking a little more maturely and so on. So pay attention to that. And then they're going to talk about late adolescence, and that's going to be the more of the high school kids, 15 and up, and that they're going to be a little more what we call identity exploration, starting to think about what their values are and what they're going to do with their life. So early adolescence, focus on their bodies changing. Late adolescence, what am I going to do with my life, dating, career, things like that. The author then moves into a thing called emerging adults, because in today's age, very seldom do kids just go from being an adolescent and they're ready for independence. So there's this extended period now that we have, and again, we call it emerging adults. I'd pay attention to that. That's going to be a transition between adolescence and adulthood. The key to emerging adults is that while they have legal rights as an adult, they're probably still somewhat dependent on their families to support them in some way, maybe paying tuition, helping them with their car notes. They may still be living at home and not having to be totally independent. The final transition in this section, though, is moving into adulthood. I would pick, if there is a question on that, I would look at something that says self-sufficient, totally independent, capable of and responsible for themselves and making their own decisions. And that's basically that section. Looks like I have about 6 or 7 questions from that section. The next section is, and by the way, which is the final section in this chapter, is the largest sections, and that's section 4, and it really deals with the science of adolescence, meaning the actual study of adolescence, the scientific method. What steps would you take if you were going to do research regarding adolescence? So pay attention. There are 4 steps to the scientific method, and let me go ahead and tell you now. Step 2 of the scientific method is collecting the data. The author spends almost the rest of the chapter doing nothing but discussing how to do that. And so you can expect about anywhere between 12 and 15 questions, which is pretty close to a third of the questions on the first test. And so as you go through that section, pay attention that you can determine the scenario and what type of collection data method are they using. So let me say ahead of time, the 3 different types that are listed is descriptive research, correlational research, and experimental research. Under descriptive research, there are a number of examples in the chapter. Basically, descriptive research is just gathering the data and reporting on what you found. So it would be something as simple as observing and documenting, might be surveying, interviewing people, and just say I interviewed 300 people and 80% agreed with whatever the matter was being studied. Case studies, where you study an individual in great length. Testing, like give a test and then just tell the person what they made. They might take an IQ test and you just tell them their score. That's descriptive research, and there are a number of different descriptive researches. When you move out of that category to the second one is correlational. In correlational, when you're looking in your book, you're going to see that in this one, you're looking for the degree of relationship between 2 variables. Maybe one variable increases, the other variable increases, and you can predict how that's going to come out. The other way a correlation might work is if one variable increases, the other decreases. It just depends on what your research is. I would certainly understand correlational coefficients. Again, it's in that section. And it's going to be a number like a 0.85, a 0.50, something like that. that number is going to indicate just how strong the relationship is between those variables. The higher the number, the stronger the correlation, and the more easily you'll be able to predict the outcome. As the numbers go down, then obviously it's a weak correlation, and the two variables probably have no relationship to each other. One doesn't seem to have any impact on the other, and so on. If you see a sign in front of the number, like if you see a plus, that means it's a direct correlation saying that either both variables are moving in the same direction. If you see a minus sign in front of the number, then that's called an inverse correlation. That means as one variable is increasing, the other is decreasing. They're moving in opposite directions. And so keep that in mind, because that would tell you the type of study. The other one tells you the strength of the correlation. I'll try to review this with you again as we get closer to the test. I'm just trying to point out to you for sure right now what you should be paying attention to as you read the material and follow the PowerPoint. The final method of research data collection is conducting an experiment. Here's the key. On an experiment, you're looking for cause and effect. One thing causes the other, the result. So you have to have an independent variable and a dependent variable. And you have to have a control group and an experimental group. So look at that. The last part of this section talks about when you do your research. If you do it all at one time or you do it over some period of time. So they call that time span research. So look at that little paragraph, and again, possibly later in this week, I'll try to get in more detail with you on that. So for today, that lays out the chapter for you, the sections, how many questions you should expect, and the type of material in each of those sections. Okay, you can email me if you have any questions, and we'll see how it's going. Thank you.